Well, hello, folks, and welcome to the Search for Common Ground class in week one of the 2024 episode of Common Ground on the Hill Traditions Week. This is our flagship class. As many of you know, this will not be the first time you've tuned in this week, or you may be finding us later on in the year. The Search for Common Ground is best described in our catalog. And I'll read that to you now. You can also find this online in our catalog at commongroundonthehill.org. So the Search for Common Ground Traditions Week 1. In this, our flagship class, we draw from our experience as artists and human beings to have a dialogue arising from our life together here in this community and in the larger society. In an atmosphere of trust and safety, and inspired by song, images, and story, we will listen to and learn from the voices of our sisters and brothers from communities represented in our circle. We gather at Common Ground on the Hill in our 30th summer, 30 years, in the midst of a world stricken by climate disasters, while trying to emerge from a 4-year pandemic, financial and ecological crises, wars, never-ending nuclear threats, racial crises, the continued unveiling of systemic abuse, issues of immigration and survival, the omnipresent threat of terror, both foreign and domestic, and counterproductive divisive politics. Yet we also find ourselves at a time of potential for great needed change. We shall discuss and consider what we are doing as artists and individuals to bring about the changes and create the communities that we seek and desire. And what we do in this class is focus on individual artists who do this work and have been doing this work perhaps for a long time. I'd like to introduce you to my old friend, Rod MacDonald, and we're going to have a wonderful hour here of music and chat. So take it away, Rod.
Thank you, Walt. Pleasure to be here. 30 years, Walt. That's quite an achievement. That's pretty amazing. All right. I thought I'd sing one of my more requested songs, actually. This is a song I get a lot of people asking for, and I never really knew that it was that popular with some of my longtime fans until I started singing on Facebook on Sunday nights during the pandemic, and I kept seeing it in the comment section, people asking for it. So. You who sleep beside me here in this quiet night, do you ever wonder how you first came in sight? The bells of the cathedral were dying in the wind. You looked at me and smiled across your crowd of friends, and I felt a recognition, not of someone from the past, but of a true beauty that was meant to last. And I wanted to speak to you, or even say your name and get it right. You who sleep beside me here in this quiet night, you who sleep beside me here in this quiet life, do you ever wonder how you became my wife? The room was lit by just a candle. Over by the bed, you walked across the room, smiled and turned your head, and I felt a recognition, not of from another time, but of the meaning of the words, will you be mine? And I wanted to hold you, safe from every sorrow or strife. You who sleep beside me here in this quiet life, now you who sleep beside me here in this quiet quiet place. Do you ever wonder at the futures we face? At the sound of thunder, I look for shelter for two, and I walk through this world knowing I'll come to rest with you. And I feel a recognition, not a habit or right or wrong, but a feeling of arriving at the place where I belong. And I whisper I love you and leave you in your own state of grace. You who sleep beside me here in this quiet place. You who sleep beside me here in this quiet night.
Oh, what a great song.
Thank you, Walt.
And how long ago did you write that?
Oh, that's been around a while. I think I wrote that not too long, maybe 4 or 5 years after Nicole and I got married in Florida. You know, since I know we're talking today about songwriting process a little bit, because that's what I'm teaching. It strikes me as interesting. One of the elements of songwriting process is what you leave out. It was somewhat inspired originally by the fact that in South Florida, where I live, it's fairly common a few times a year that they announce that they've found a car in a canal or somewhere that's been missing for years, of somebody who disappeared without a trace, usually a woman. And my my Mrs. Nicole's a bit younger than myself and from Switzerland, and not really used to the, I don't know what you'd call it, the modern downsides of civilization in South Florida sometimes. And I had a bridge in which I, you know, I talked about that and prayed that it wouldn't happen. And when we were recording it, Mark Dan like stopped me in the middle of one of the takes and said, "Why are you singing this middle part? You've got this beautiful song, and in the middle of it, you got this horror story. You know, why are you doing this?" So I took his advice and left it out, and I've never sung it since. So there's a good example sometimes of listening to advice and learning what to leave out in a song.
Do you have a system by which, or not a system, but are you a scheduled writer? Do you force yourself to write, or do you write totally by inspiration?
I would say somewhere in between, but mostly by inspiration. I take notes. I make mental notes for myself. Um, I do things piecemeal sometimes. If I feel something buzzing in my brain, I'll sit down and write it down. Maybe even type it into the computer so I can see it more clearly and work on it. If it's a lyric, if it's a piece of music, I'll sit and play it over and over again on the guitar until I really feel like I know it, and then just let it sit around and see what happens from there. Um, I don't get up every day and write, like I know some people who do that, but I'm not one of them. Um, but I do think that I do think about writing every day. I do kind of like, you know, do a brain inventory almost every day at some point. I'm just like, what am I thinking about? What am I working on? And I think that's necessary and very useful to anyone writing songs to kind of just kind of keep an awareness of what they're thinking about somewhere in the back of the mind. I always tell people in my classes to write things down. You know, one of the big differences between writing and everything else is that if you wake up the next morning and you can't remember it, you're not writing. So, you know, I try to I try to figure out a way to make something. If I get what I consider a good idea, I try to make it tangible right away so that I can remember it the next day.
Right. I know years ago I took a course. It was a Jungian course, and it got into dream work. And what we learned was that if we gave ourselves as a pre-sleep suggestion to remember, um, that the dreams were more vivid and I would remember them. I mean, you can actually train yourself to tap into your dreams. As you say, you know, remembering things, remembering these moments of inspiration can be tough because
Yeah.
they leave.
I've written songs coming out of dreams like that, just writing them down in the morning. Sometimes you look at them. In fact, one of my very, well, not, I guess it wasn't a dream song, but I've written a couple like that. I had a friend in New York who used to carry a dream journal around with a big, thick volume. And we'd be sitting, I had dinner with him once a week, a lot of times. And he would, we'd be talking about something and he'd go, "Oh, that reminds me of something I saw the other day." And he'd pop it open and read me his dream notes, which were always like really scribbled and hard to make out and stuff. I think it's good to do that. Um, I've been having some crazy dreams lately. I don't know how I'd write them in a song, but I dreamed the other night that Sting sat down across from me backstage somewhere and asked me to play Every Breath You Take with him, like in front of millions of people. And fortunately, I do know the song kind of, so I was able to do it, and actually the dream included playing the song on stage in front of all kinds of people, which usually dreams don't get that far. Usually dreams end with you know, like looking for your guitar or trying to find your shirt or being introduced and the microphone not working. I mean, a lot of dreams end up like that are musical dreams. But this one ended very nicely. It was kind of fun.
Well, if Sting does appear and asks you to sing that song with him, you can say, "No, we already did that. Let's do it." Yeah. So,
Yeah, yeah.
Rod, what do you find? You know, given the preamble to this hour here about the search for common ground in the midst of pestilence and division and war, etc.
Hmm.
Uh, what do you say to the sort of the role of the songwriter in our day? Um, it's hard to believe that it is still our day, but I think it is. And you know, how do you go about thinking about that and um, you know, cutting that fine edge of artistry and didacticism? You know, don't want to be didactic. That's when people turn right off to what we have to say.
Um, I stress in my classes, and I think the reason I do this is because it's the way I feel about my own work, that the most important thing is to, at the end of the day, to feel that you've expressed whatever it was you wanted to say honestly, without any watering down, so to speak. But to also express it well, not just lyrically but musically. So, to me, the most important thing is that you start out with a clear idea, or at least you start out with your idea and you develop it, and when you're done, you feel that it says what you want to say, not that you're saying something because you think other people will like it, but that you're saying what you want to say. You are the artist. You're a unique individual. Every one of the people who takes my classes, I assume, is a unique individual. And I'm friends with and work with a lot of other songwriters of my peers and stuff in the Greenwich Folk Festival. And I always say, do your thing. You know, do the thing that you think is most important to do. Don't feel like you're gonna please people too much, because at the end of the day, I think that's ultimately what people need to hear. Um, so I suppose that sort of disregards popularity as a concern, and I would imagine that people who are working in the, major media have to wrestle with with popularity, and they probably write songs by committee. But I don't think that's worth my time, and I don't recommend it for anybody in this context.
Tell us about.
I do think that the idea. People say, "Do you think that a song can change the world?" I suppose a song can change the world. I don't think that you need to start out thinking that the song you write is going to change the world. I think it's more important maybe that it exhibits some growth of the individual, and then if it's really a good song, it will go where it goes, and it may have a real impact.
Mhm. Tell us about the Greenwich Village Folk Festival and what it looks to in its past and what it looks like in the future.
Um, we started in 1987 with a series of concerts in the village, one a year, usually in the Washington Square Church. A couple times we did them in bigger halls at New York University, and it just started out as a neighborhood festival. My we had four producers. I'm one of them. I think I can honestly say that the other guys think I'm the guy who instigated it. It was my idea, and I pushed it. But I quickly got a lot of support from three other guys who made it work. And one of them, Ray Misek, and I now do everything jointly. We book it, and Ray handles the money for the most part, and I handle more of the artist type issues. But we book and plan things together. Um, we had 35 performers in our first concert in 6 hours. It was free, and it was always free. The concerts have always been free. We've never charged anyone. We do take donations, but we consider it a gift to the community. That's our slogan. So what we did was we just wanted to give the village music scene a coherent, event that everybody would want to come to, and performers would want to be in. And in our very first one, I called up Richie Havens, who was a friend of mine I worked with a lot back in the '80s, and asked him if he'd be in it. And he said, "I'm there. What do you want me to do?" He didn't ask me any details, nothing. It was amazing. I said, "Richie, are you sure? We're not paying you anything. It's a 3-song set. It's in a church in front of the people. There's not going to be any money in it for anybody." And he was supposed to be in Israel the day after that we were having it, and he rebooked his flight so he could do it.
Wow.
And I said, "Are you sure you want to do this?" And he said to me, "I've been waiting all my life for there to be a Greenwich Village Folk Festival. I wouldn't think of missing it for anything."
Wow.
And that that made such a difference to me, that, and we got a lot of the older, more established artists of the folk world: Peter Yarrow, Odetta, Tom Paxton, Dave Van Ronk. All of them appeared in our shows in the 6 years, I think, that we did it in the village. After I moved to Florida, it kind of went dormant for a while, and then when the pandemic happened, Ray called me up and said, "What do you think about doing some live shows and online?" And I had already been thinking of it, so we started doing it. We started booking people. We got a lot of support from people. We had Suzanne Vega in one of our first, I think our second or third show. We had, we've had, Kathy Mattea, and some of the guys I mentioned earlier. Noel Paul Stuckey has been in a couple of them, from Peter, Paul, and Mary. Holly Near, Judy Collins gave us a video. Jeff Daniels, the actor, did one of our shows. And we've also had a lot of my own peers: Cliff Eberhardt, Dave Massengill, you know, Chris Lavin, yourself. A lot of very, very fine performers. And we've partnered with Ron Olesko from Folk Music Notebook, the 24-hour internet folk music station, to book some new people, because he's in a position to get all the new CDs of new artists that come out. And so he's been booking a couple people each month. So we now kind of run a range between, some new people that are kind of up and coming, and some people that have been around a while and are real good, and occasionally one of the older people that are still actively working, and in the process we get to kind of mix and blend people together. It's amazing sometimes the response that the artists have backstage.
Mhm.
I remember we had a show where we had, I think, Chris Smither, Robert Ross, who's won like several New York Blues Awards, really excellent blues guitarist, and Jack Williams, who, if you've ever heard Jack Williams play, you know is a phenomenal acoustic guitarist. And most none of them had ever seen Jack play. They didn't know who he was. He mostly works in the South, toured with Mickey Newbury for years, and Jack did his set, and everybody was like writing chat messages like, "Who is this guy?" So sometimes we've really introduced people to each other. We've had Walter Parks a couple times, who's done lived in the Okefenokee Swamp with the people that are living in the swamp for 300 years, have virtually no contact with the outside world. He went in and he lived with them for a year and learned their music and adapted it to his own stuff, and has recorded a bunch of things for the Smithsonian. We had him do a presentation. Was incredible, absolutely incredible. He's such a great musician. So we're really proud of a lot of the really good music that we've brought to people. We're starting to kind of space out a little bit. We are taking the next 2 months off, and then we'll be back in the fall with some concerts. We've got a Phil Oakes song night with Sonny Oakes hosting. We've got we're on November. I think it's November 5th. We're on 2 nights before election night. That should be an interesting show.
How can people tap into this? How do
We stream
we?
it live on YouTube. You can just look up Greenwich Village Folk Festival and type in the month that it is, and it'll be there. It goes to our website, greenwichvillagefolkfestival.org, all one word. We stream it to Facebook, which I think is GVFF 2024, facebook.com/GVFF 2024. And after the shows are over, we archive them. So you could actually, even as of this moment, you can go back and watch all of the shows we've done. I think we've done almost 50 of them since June of 2020. And they're pretty good sound quality. We've very occasionally had to take somebody out of the archive because the sound was messed up by the internet along the transmission route, but most of the time they're pretty good.
Um, is there any impetus for you all to get together in person as a result of this?
We've thought about it. The Washington Square Church is now a condominium.
Yeah.
Steve Van Zant lives on the top floor. I'd love to get him to sponsor it, but there isn't any place in Greenwich Village where we'd be able to do it that I know of. But we have thought of it. We've talked about it, and we've kind of got some various things going on where we're talking with people that I wouldn't want to jinx by talking about them, but they exist. We do have some plans to kind of do some different things if we can get it together. We're a volunteer organization, and I've been president of the Greenwich Village Folk Festival since 1987. It might not be a bad idea if we recruited some younger people, but
Well, how about we get you out of the administrative mode and ask for another song? What might?
okay, okay. And before finishing, I really loved the concert we did at Common Ground on the Hill last summer. We
How
had
did that go? I'm running around doing so many things. I think the concert happened during orientation here.
Yes, it did. We had everybody sneak away for
Yeah.
15 minutes, come over and do a set, and go back. Some of the people were Sally Rogers and Howie Burson, Tom Chapin, Professor Louis. These are all faculty members
Yeah.
at Common Ground on the Hill. And also Stephen Hannigan, the piper and percussionist, and Shannon Quinn from Nova Scotia, the fiddler, and Nicholas Carter. Oh, God, was
Yeah.
fantastic.
Nicholas Carter is a phenomenal musician. Yeah.
Absolutely. And Josh Heisel, who I thought was really great. Had some bone-chilling songs about his experience as a veteran.
Yeah.
We recently had Michael J. Ronstadt, who was supposed to do that show. He canceled on us at the time.
That's who was just calling me, by the way.
I'm sorry?
The phone that interrupted us here, that was Michael Ronstadt calling me.
Oh, okay, okay. He's a wonderful young musician, really excellent. Well, let's see. Well, you know what? Speaking of the pandemic, here's a song that I wrote and recorded on my most recent CD. I'm a bit of a history buff. In the next generation to come down the line, I believe it was the year 2039. They asked, hey mom, what was the pandemic? I've been hearing about it in school, and I bet it was something you'd never want to do again. Mom sat down, shook her head, and said with a grin, oh, the pandemic, wasn't that a time? Well, said Mom, I was just in my teens. Your daddy was trying to get in my jeans. We couldn't travel, so we married on Zoom. The preacher in Maine, our parents back home. Streamed the first kiss, had colored balloons. Baked our own cake, went on our honeymoon without leaving the room. Oh, the pandemic, wasn't that a time? Well, said Mom, and who could forget? The numbers kept climbing and no one protected their faces, till thousands were gasping for air, and businesses shutting down everywhere. And speaking of time, every now and then you'd hear the news of a trusted friend you knew we'd never see again. There was no toilet paper on the shelf. You couldn't go to work, so we kept to ourselves. Took walks in the moonlight when the curfew was gone, and I've never felt closer to anyone. And there was this guy who was like a big joke. Said no one's really dying, it's just a cruel hoax, but he was no friend of mine. Yeah, the pandemic, wasn't that a time? It was a quiet time to reflect, said Mom. We had 600 channels in the living room. It's amazing to me to remember today there was never anything on anyway, except for live concerts that with these guys I know came on every Sunday with a different show, and somehow it eased my mind. Yeah, the pandemic, wasn't that a time? And in the midst of it all, people took to the streets when an unarmed black man killed by police was becoming too normal. And for the first time, the cops were made to pay for the crime. And speaking of crime, there were women and men who thought they'd overturn the government. Well, they ended up doing time. Now you knew it was coming to an end, and soon, when you turned on the news, and every afternoon there was a shooting in a mall or a store. So many thoughts and prayers you couldn't take anymore. It was easier to buy a gun than to vote. We had to dig deep to keep the ship afloat for the next generation to come down the line. That's what Mama said back in 2039. Yeah, the pandemic, wasn't that a time? Oh, the pandemic, wasn't that a time?
Wow. Yeah. Well, there we are. So you can put the year you reference is 2037,
2039.
2039. Yeah.
Hey,
Thank you.
Rex, can
Ryan.
you, they're coming in on the car. Can you warn them that I'm doing this? We got a bunch of people coming and going here at the house where
Oh,
I'm
let them
staying.
come on in. Wow. You certainly encapsulated that experience. And it's interesting to we're still living in the wake of it,
Yeah,
um, in terms of getting people to come out and do the things they used to do.
yeah.
People
You know,
became
one of the that's one of the kind of styles of song that a lot of the folks who come to songwriting classes try to write is songs that cover some ground like that. Not unusual, and I think it has. I'm not sure I'm consciously aware of it when I'm writing myself, but there are some techniques that I use to kind of help people steer through that process. One is to kind of like structuralize a song so that you have a set block of lines and
Mhm.
meter kind of that you can work with to get a framework so that you can work on a verse here and then another verse there and it builds because it doesn't wander. It actually has a structure to the song. So even though your primary goal is to tell a story, you by working within a structure, you know, it begins to take shape, and then you can
Yeah.
figure out where you want to put things. So that's kind of like a good example of how that works, I think. Um, and then it's just kind of like applying the music in a way to.
Do you still sing the song "My Neighbors in Del Rey"?
Oh sure, just not all that often, but yeah, I get requests for it a fair amount, so I do it.
Yeah,
Um,
I I just remember that song um, as being something that really sort of humanized the story
yeah,
of who were
I
these.
remember playing it at actually one of the faculty concerts at Common Ground on the Hill. Not long after I wrote it, I think the same year I wrote it.
Could you recall it and play it for us now?
Yeah, it'll take me a second. I have to retune the guitar a bit,
Sure.
but I can do
Take your
that.
time. I can talk a little bit about this. This was right after uh, 9/11, and we were all still reeling from it. I especially zeroed in on your song because um, the song is about the hijackers, and we know that they trained here before they went on their killing spree. Um, some of them took flying lessons. Others were doing physical workout in gymnasiums, in Laurel, Maryland, which always made
There's a there's a little airport near me in Florida called Lantana Airport, and the it's unmanned from 5 p.m. on until like 9 o'clock the following morning. It has a um, it has two big lights. The, you're flying through the air and you hit a button on your controller and two rows of blue lights light up along the sides of the runway. And at the end of the runway is this big disc that's like the size of a house. The top half of it is, well, it's divided horizontally in half, and each half can flash either red or white. If it's if it's solid red, you have to pull up and not land. You're too low. If it's solid white, you're too high, and you're gonna fly off the runway at the end. So you have to get one white, one red light, and that means it's okay to land. It's like an automatic radar reading of where your plane's coming in. And I had a friend who, Alan Anapu, who was the original captain of the Clearwater back in the day. And
Yes, I sailed with him.
you what? You sailed with him?
Yeah, I was on the Clearwater in its first fall, and he was the captain at that time.
Yeah. Well, he and I became good friends in Florida. He's actually my oldest kid's godfather, but he's unfortunately no longer with us. But he used to take me flying in his little two-seater, four-seater plane. It had a little Cessna. So I knew this airport really well. And this is where these guys trained. And they never bothered to learn to land. They just learned to take off and steer. And nobody ever asked them, why don't you guys want to learn how to land a plane? Anyway, yeah, so that I kind of, I got home one night during, well, actually, it's kind of interesting, a little bit of a story. I was playing a sidewalk cafe every Sunday night. I moved to Florida to look after my mom and dad, and I stopped touring just completely, went cold turkey on touring. And I was playing a little sidewalk cafe in Lake Worth every Sunday night, and this guy walked by, and he stopped, and this was right after 9/11. He stopped and he looked at me for a while. I don't remember what I was playing. And then he walked in, he sat down, he ordered a cup of coffee, and then he ordered a second cup of coffee, sat down across from him. And when I took a break, he asked me if I would join him. And I sat down, and he looked at me with this intense expression on his face, and he said, "Don't you want to know what happened on 9/11?" That was like his opening line to me. And I said, "Oh, well, doesn't everybody, you know?" And he said, "Well, you must be very troubled by this." And I hadn't said or sung anything about it at all. Like everybody else, I was still kind of stunned. This was probably, I think 9/11 was a Tuesday or a Wednesday. This was probably like 10 days after it happened, like a week and a half after it happened. And he said, "Don't you want to know, you know, what's going on?" And I said, "Yeah, sure, you know. Of course it makes me sad. I'm just as blown away as everybody else is, you know." And he said to me, "The guys that did this, they willingly gave their lives to do this. Isn't it amazing to you that nobody seems to want to know what they really were trying to accomplish? Everybody just wants to dismiss them as a bunch of psychotic people that hate us." He said they label them as crazy. They label them as hating America. But they planned this meticulously, and they gave their lives to do this. Doesn't anybody take that seriously? Well, I went home at the end of the night, and I walked into I had this guitar that, because I'd learned Caledonia from Doogie McLean, I had it tuned to a C chord, and I just left it laying around on the couch at my house. And I picked up the Sunday paper, and there was a 2-page spread about these very guys. And I started sitting there just kind of going like this, reading the newspaper. And they all came from the town I live in, Delray Beach, or they all live there. My neighbors in Delray, 8 out on Federal Highway. There's a waitress at Denny's who remembers. They had loud conversations, hit on all the waitresses, and they weren't very good tippers. And my neighbors in Delray drove to Miami one day and worked out on a flight simulator. Then my neighbors in Delray stole a plane bound for LA and flew it into the World Trade Center. My neighbors in Delray worked out at the gym every day, rented a condo, studied to be pilots. They had rental cars and cell phones, used the library computers in town, struck out with the girls in local night spots. But my neighbors in Delray hated the American way and lived only to die for some heaven where virgins trade to serve and Allah is observed, gratefully awaiting to reward them. Love thy neighbor, the Bible says. God is great, the prophets pray. Wouldn't I love to know what God will say to my neighbors in Delray? My neighbors in Delray came from countries far away and lived here freely among us. They studied all the ways of the good old USA, thinking up ways to destroy us. And my neighbors in Delray got down on their knees to pray for the strength to leave life behind them. So my neighbors in Delray wouldn't be around to pay the price for all their victims. Love thy neighbor, the Bible says. God is great, the prophets pray. Wouldn't you love to know what God will say to my neighbors in Delray? My neighbors in Delray, well, I really couldn't say I would even recognize them. Walking through the mall or anywhere at all, I know my other neighbors all despise them. Somewhere far away, they don't care what the neighbors say, and they would only criticize me. But if my neighbors in Delray are in paradise today, it would very much surprise me. Love thy neighbor, the Bible says. God is great, the prophets pray. Don't you really know what God will say to my neighbors in Delray? Well, a little flub there at the end, but that's the idea.
Honest. Well, what a powerful song, and it still rings. It rings true.
I do get requests for it, and it gets a lot of airplay every year in September on folk radio around the country. It's, you know, I think one of the first times I played it was on Bob Fass's show on WBAI in New York. Did you ever do Bob Fass's show?
Never did that.
He used to come on at midnight and go till like 3:30 in the morning, and he would never interrupt anybody. Absolutely never. I was on his show many times, particularly in the 1970s, but This was in 2001 when I was back in New York doing a concert,
Mhm.
and I played the song, and he just looked at me, stared at me for about like 2 full minutes, didn't say a word, and then the phone rang, and he hit the button on the phone, and some guy starts going like, "That was incredible! You wrote that, holy cow!" and I, I felt embarrassed. I mean, it was so the guy's response was so over the top that I felt embarrassed because it really is about a very desperately horrible situation, and Bob interrupted the guy and he said, "He was just doing his job," he
Yeah,
says.
yeah. Well, Rod, it's been wonderful to sit with you and hear you talk about songwriting, and but more wonderful to hear you singing and playing. And I'm going to remind people that if they want to get a good taste of Greenwich Village, to look up the Greenwich Village Folk Festival. You can just Google it, and you'll find it
Yep.
where it is happening and where it's happening next. You can see all the archives. Some 30 of them, you said?
50, I think, or pretty
50
close to it.
shows. Yeah,
One a month since June of 2020.
yeah. Songwriting. It's powerful, wonderful stuff, and you can do it with Rod here at Common Ground on the Hill. It's a little late in the week to sign up, but let's try to get you back in person next year. And
That'd be great. I like that.
yeah, well, thank you so much.
I miss seeing everybody. It's fun being on the road with my family, but I miss coming to Common Ground this year. I look
Yeah.
forward to it again.
Well, the pandemic has had its effect on us. We've, of course, went to all virtual, and now we're virtual and in person. But the days of the 3 solid weeks of in-person programming are, uh, we have some building to do.
Hmm.
Get back to that point.
Well, I tell you, Walt, 30-year anniversary. That's pretty impressive. Congratulations.
Yeah, who would have thunk?
Yeah, that's right.
Well, thank you so much, and we will see you. If we don't see you in the future, we'll see you in the pasture. That's some old time.
Okay, thanks, Walt. Good
Thank
seeing
you
you.
so much.